We will go ahead and get started this morning. Welcome, everyone. We'll first start with panel number 2 for House Joint Resolution 139, the Housing Affordability, Impact Fees, and Development Taxes panel. I'll introduce Dr. Mike Strickland, who will call forward the panelists and introduce them as well. Dr. Strickland.
Thank you, and good morning, Commissioners. So following up on the panel from yesterday, this morning the Commission will be hearing from a second panel of speakers on the problems of housing affordability in Tennessee. Today, we are joined by 6 panelists: Ryan Eagley, President and CEO of Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce; Julie Keel, Program Director of Mountaintop. She is running slightly late, having to drive in from Grundy County; Hunter McDonald, Realtor of Red Realty; Mayor Ken Moore of the City of Franklin; Ralph Perry, Executive Director of the Tennessee Housing Development Agency; and Maggie Ryden, Vice President of Advocacy for the Federation of Appalachian Housing Enterprises.
Thank you, Dr. Strickland. Do we want to which end do we want to start on? Does it matter? Is that Ryan? Okay. Go ahead, Ryan.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing us to provide some rural perspective. My name is Ryan Eagley, and I'm the President and CEO of the Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure in your communities you have a Chamber of Commerce or an economic development organization. Our organization serves as that designated economic development organization, and we drive a few strategic initiatives to make sure that our economy, both locally and regionally, are vibrant and sustainable, starting, of course, with industrial development, working our way down to the community development, making sure the private sector and small businesses are engaged. Then tourism marketing, so hospitality, tourism, and livability is a very big piece of that, and also workforce development. You can't win industrial projects unless you have good people, of course, a lot of power and good product. And so we are very holistic in our approach, and in my experience there, I've been there 8 years now, born and raised in Lawrenceburg. We have noticed the issue of housing, and I want to kind of preface everything I say with this statement. We believe housing is a workforce recruitment and workforce retention issue. It matters to businesses, and so that's why we have an interest in working on it. And so in 2017, 2018, our organization started and launched a few housing forums inviting realtors, bankers, insurance agents, local developers, interested stakeholders, just to start the conversation. So just know this is not an issue that came up last year. This is something we've been working on for a few years. Of course, when COVID hit, there was a rush to rural Tennessee, and I hope many of your communities, if you're rural, experienced that. That exacerbated what we knew was coming. We thought we had 10 years, and it hit us in 2 as far as housing shortage. But of course, zooming out from that, it's a workforce shortage issue. If you're rural, you may have experienced brain drain at some point, where the young people leave your community for college, never come back. Well, we are having the problem of our young people want to live in Lawrence County, but there's nowhere for them to live. And so I just want to be brief and just let you know that we have run into a few issues with housing development. Namely, I'll give you 3. Utility districts in our community pose a challenge for developers. Zoning and codes, we do not have that in our community, so it makes it a little bit hard to plan. And then infrastructure, so funding roads, water and sewer specifically, also pose an issue. And then also on the consumer side, affordability and availability is an issue. To put it in perspective, in August of 2019, the price for a home was on average $158,000, and today, August of 2023, was the last data that we pulled, $300,000. The price per square foot went from $79 per square foot to average sales price per square foot for an existing home, not a new construction, is up $100 to $172 per square foot. And so as we tackle the problem, we've seen some housing development. Let me say that, about 800 new units built in the past 10 years, which is good for our rural community. None of those have, however, been in the entry-level, young professional, or affordable categories. And so we're looking at ways in our community to encourage our local governments, our local power companies, and utility districts to induce new development. again, we're seeing massive economic development being part of the Middle Tennessee region. In fact, in my tenure at the Chamber, we've been very blessed to announce 12 new companies locating in our community, creating more than 1,300 jobs. Those are direct jobs. Our labor force has grown by about 1,700. So our population's growing. The economic development strategy is working, but the housing is the #1 issue when it's coming to our workforce today. So with that said, I look forward to entertaining any questions you might have. And again, I want to thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much. As Julie's running late, we'll reserve her for last. Next will be Hunter McDonald.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee. I'm honored to be here today. My name is Hunter McDonald, and I'm a commercial and residential real estate broker and property manager in Rutherford County. I also serve as the first vice president for the Middle Tennessee Association of Realtors. I'm here today because I spoke on housing affordability earlier this year, and our roles as real estate professionals are more than just facilitators in transactions. We serve people and help them with their dreams and aspirations of home ownership. We fully understand the impact that home ownership has on individuals and families. This reaches well beyond just the structures. Home ownership helps create and build vibrant communities where we can thrive. The challenge of affordable housing is hitting our local markets extremely hard, affecting not only our clients, but our entire communities. Recent data highlights this situation. The average cost of a new construction home in Rutherford County over the last 6 months is $465,000. Rutherford County currently has a school facilities tax of $1 a square foot on all new construction. Smyrna recently increased their max impact fees from $3,870 to $5,786 on new single-family homes. Murfreesboro recently implemented impact fees of $1.50 per square foot in July, and those are going to increase over $1 per square foot over the next 2 years. These are just some of the examples of governmental fees that make up approximately 25% of new homes in Tennessee. As the cost of new construction home rise, so do existing home sales prices. August of 2023, that median sales home price of a home in Rutherford County was over $440,000. The median sales price of a home in Tennessee was $381,800. That's up 5.8% over last year. Now look at the income as of 2022. The median household income in Rutherford County was $71,549. But if you were to plug that into a mortgage calculator along with 20% down, that recommended budget of $301,200 is a far cry from the median household of $440,000. So this is also a perfect client situation with excellent credit, zero debt, and no HOA dues on top of that. Many first-time home buyers are simply not putting 20% down either. This leads to a lot of Tennesseans having to make the decision to rent rather than buy. And just so we can have some stats on that, the rental data provided by Zillow from 2019 to 2023, the average was $1,437 in 2019. The average was $1,501 in 2020. The average was $1,673 in 2021. In 2022, that was $1,914. And then in 2023, that was $1,958. Overall, pre-pandemic to present, Rutherford County has seen a 36% in rental rate increase. I personally witnessed the struggles with countless individuals and families in their pursuit of the American dream of home ownership, and I definitely understand the barriers these families face. With soaring prices, escalating rents, and a shortage of affordable housing options. Today, I stand before you not only as a real estate broker, but as a concerned member of our community. I firmly believe that addressing these issues of affordable housing is not just a matter of moral responsibility, but one of economic importance. Since statistics clearly demonstrate that when individual families have access to stable and affordable housing, they become contributors to our economy, fostering growth and prosperity. For every dollar invested in affordable housing yields a remarkable return. I appreciate your time and willingness to allow us a seat at the table for this discussion. I believe that together we can truly make a profound and positive impact on our fellow citizens. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Mr. McDonald. Next, Mayor Ken Moore.
Well, thank you, and good morning, Chairman and panel, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm not real good at this. How's that? Good morning, Chairman and panel members, committee members and fellow panelists. I represent the city of Franklin. A town of 90,000 people has been growing at 2,000 people a year for about 20 years. We do have a housing issue. It's primarily a housing issue for workforce housing. 70% of our workforce comes into the community every single day. With the increased cost of housing that we've seen, it becomes a real challenge for children of families that are old Franklin people, or even new workforce coming in to get into the workforce area. Our Franklin Housing Authority has been redeveloping their property for a number of years. They have a lot of old property that was not very dense, and so they've made an impact in our community as far as affordable. But workforce housing is what our community really needs. Our community does have impact fees, both sewer, water, and road, and those fees we're currently reevaluating as far as how much we charge. It's significantly expensive to build in Franklin because we expect the developer to pay these fees to help pay for the burden that's placed on our community. Our community has approached housing in a number of different ways. First, we have a housing commission made up of local experts who meet on a regular basis and are able to make recommendations to the Franklin Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Progress has been very slow, just like in other communities, as far as addressing housing needs. We used to have tools such as inclusionary zoning, which allowed or encouraged builders to build more workforce units in their development or pay a fee, and the General Assembly removed that opportunity a number of years ago. Franklin is not a community that is afraid of density. In fact, we have a lot of dense developments with the idea of trying to preserve as much open space as possible. Annexation laws have also discouraged some of the orderly development of the community. Any type of project that we see that has workforce housing, we encourage it to be deed restricted. We're currently working on a project we call the Hill Project, where 4 nonprofits are coming together to build on city property, and those units will be deed restricted. There are about 32 units in this, which scratches the surface, and the bulk of them are workforce housing. Our biggest challenge also is property costs. Property in Franklin, Williamson County is very, very expensive. We recently were able to host Director Sandra Thompson of the Federal Housing and Finance Administration to have a discussion with her about some of the Freddie Mae and Fannie Mae, I'm getting that all backwards. You know what I'm talking about, Freddie Mae and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I'll get it out. It's still a little early. So that was an encouraging discussion with a number of elected officials there, and also subject matter experts. We just need more tools to be able to encourage workforce housing and developments in our community. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and make some comments. I'm glad to answer questions if I may.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Next, Director Ralph Perry.
Well, thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Pleased to be with all of you today. I try not to repeat and make points that you've heard over the last couple of days. I do want to emphasize that I think the approach to increasing the supply of housing is there's a role for each of us at every level of government, and we look forward to being part of that. Let me make a couple of observations and suggestions, perhaps, and then I'll be pleased to take any questions that you have. Obviously, we are in an environment of rising housing costs. And unlike 20 years ago, when that was driven by loose lending, dodgy lending practices, today this is entirely a matter of supply and demand. Since that housing crash, everywhere in America, we've gone the better part of 15 years not building enough housing, and that is especially noticed in states like Tennessee, where literally every day hundreds of people move to join us. So we need to build more housing of all types, of all price ranges, but that need is especially acute at entry-level price points and at rents that are going to be affordable to regular working people. We've noticed there's a lot of construction these days. On the apartment side, though, nationally, we know that 89% of that inventory is aimed at the high end. And I don't know many home builders who are aspiring to build homes that are going to be offered for less than $300,000. My friends at Habitat cannot build a $200,000 home. Almost nothing affordable gets built in this state or any other without some sort of support, tax credits, subsidies, local incentives. And we certainly need more of those resources, but there's more to the story than that. On the resource side, we have a very competitive mortgage product for first-time home buyers and down payment assistance. The housing tax credits and tax-exempt bond authority that our agency administers produces quite a bit of housing. We hope to get more of those resources. There's actually bipartisan legislation in Washington, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, 200 co-sponsors evenly split among Democrats and Republicans. This doesn't happen in Washington. Senator Blackburn is the Republican co-lead in the Senate. We have 7 of Tennessee's 9 members of Congress on the bill. Still hoping to go 9 for 9 before the year is out. We receive no state funding at present, but I'm encouraged that both the governor and members of the General Assembly are interested in perhaps adding to some resources that we can provide. We'll put them to good use if you all are so inclined. And as I travel around the state, I know that many cities and counties are putting some of their own money available for incentives, offering tax breaks, and even creating some of their own housing trust funds. And all of that helps. But I want to emphasize here that those resources won't fully be put to work in your community unless there's a supportive regulatory environment. And here's what I mean. When mayors tell me, well, you know, we've got a lot of people moving in, we're going to need to build some housing, I go, well, we can help with that, but I encourage you also to take a look at your local zoning, your regulations, your permitting process. How long do things take? What fees are you expecting developers to come up? Because if those things taken together make it harder, more time-consuming, and expensive to build, you're not going to be able to get what you expect or want or need. If it's too expensive, only expensive things are going to get built. I'd also encourage you at the local level to be open to a wider range of housing styles beyond just single family over here and multifamily over here, apartments. You know, there's a whole range of missing middle housing. You know, smaller homes on smaller lots, duplexes, townhomes, small, low-rise garden-style apartments. In other words, housing that is of a style and price point that will fit comfortably into existing neighborhoods. It's the kind of thing they're trying to do in Knoxville right now in some of their neighborhoods. That's a good example. But my point is, there is an important local role in creating the conditions that make it easier to build housing for what I refer to as that moderate middle income buyer or renter. And I would encourage you to look at that. And if I might respectfully suggest the General Assembly consider providing more flexibility to local governments as they wade in and tackle some of those issues back home. Now, this isn't my first time around, and I recognize that in a lot of places, these can be politically difficult choices for you. And I think the reason for that is too many people, when they hear someone like me say affordable housing, they're picturing the projects. They think we're talking about a $50 a month flop house for layabouts and troublemakers, and nobody wants that. And they will hold it against you if they think that's what you're bringing to your community. So it's important, I think, to get the talk right on the front end, show people what we're building, and explain who it is that we're building this for. There's a tax credit property down in the Gulch. Some of you probably walked right by it not knowing that it's a tax credit property, but a single mom making $42,000 a year can live there for about $800 a month. Tax credit properties can provide affordable housing for families getting by on $65,000 and $70,000 a year. There are plenty of people in our state who need affordable housing, and many of them do work that we need to have done so that our communities continue to grow and prosper. We need the people who need affordable housing, and we need to work together to try to provide it. Thank you. I'll be glad to take questions if you have any.
Thank you, Director Perry. Next, Maggie Ryden.
Hello, my name is Maggie Ryden, and I'm pleased to join you this morning as both a resident of Tennessee and the Senior Vice President of Advocacy at FAHI. FAHI is a network of over 50 nonprofit organizations building the American dream in Appalachia. In Tennessee, we work with 16 nonprofit housing and community development agencies, predominantly serving the Appalachian parts of the state. In a recent 4-year snapshot of our work, in Tennessee, our members were able to leverage over $400 million in federal, state, local, and private funds to produce over 4,000 units of housing for over 11,000 residents. We've recently been awarded between 10 and 14 million in state and local COVID relief funds to add to those numbers and build much needed workforce housing across the state. It's that depth of expertise and on-the-ground insight that I'm pleased to share with you today. As my colleague Mr. Perry mentioned, at its core, housing affordability challenges in Tennessee are a supply and demand problem. Like many states, housing production significantly slowed, starting with the 2008 market collapse, and it hasn't fully recovered. Concurrently, here in Tennessee, we've seen sustained economic expansion that's drawn new businesses and new residents. As a result, there's greater demand for housing at the same time that production has slowed and capacities plateaued. This dynamic has greatly increased competition, which has driven up prices for home purchases, land acquisition, and even rental costs. Further complicating this environment has been the rapid rise of material costs, supply chain challenges, inflation, and in some regions, insurance. It's substantially more expensive to build or maintain or even preserve any kind of housing today than it was even 3 years ago. This is particularly true for our middle income and workforce housing. Starter homes that working families can afford have increasingly tight margins, and more we're seeing that the private market, with a mandate to maximize profit, is disincentivized from building affordable housing. However, this is where our nonprofit housing development partners can come into play. They're able to fill major gaps, largely because the metric for nonprofit housing developer success isn't profit, it's how many folks they can move into housing and economic security. They're a powerful tool if properly resourced. With that in mind, we spent some time with our FAHI Tennessee caucus members earlier this month to talk about what are the actual challenges and solutions that are driving these rapid increases in price. I'd like to share those with you now. The cost of land is probably one of the most significant barriers our members are facing in the production of affordable housing. According to the Northeast Tennessee Association of Realtors land sales report from 2023, local land sales were up 41% last year and prices were up 21.5%. This is consistent with the double-digit price increases that we've seen year over year starting in 2019. The Knoxville Area Association of Realtors State of Housing Report for 2020 noted that the average land share of a property's value in the Knoxville MSA was 44.3%. That's an increase of more than 18 percentage points from 2012. The rising cost of land inflates existing housing costs along with demand because there are fewer houses on the market, but it also increases the cost of new homes and constructions. As Carr notes, higher land prices incentivize developers to build more expensive luxury homes instead of entry-level housing. For many developers, that's an easier route than trying to push for greater housing density to make the financing on those smaller units work. The end result, housing that's not a great fit for the needs of a community. And as our economy continues to grow and demand for housing expands, land prices are only going to increase, locking more families out. We have to start securing land at today's prices. We have to support community leaders and partners in strategic land use, and we've got to work to alleviate the cost of burden of holding land during a development period. One option the state could consider is incentivizing and expanding land banking. Land banks are a mechanism for acquiring, holding, and distributing property in service of community goals. They can be government-supported, quasi-governmental, or nonprofit run. They obtain land through a variety of mechanisms, including foreclosures, municipal government transfers, donations, or open market purchases. They can help package adjacent properties for development, help limit the costs of holding property until construction begins, and they can be a useful tool in the redevelopment and reuse of vacant and abandoned properties. But equally important, by buying today or obtaining land today, we're doing it at today's prices, not future. Opening up our current statute guiding the development of land banks to either create a statewide land bank or incentivize regional, county, or local land banks has real value in helping to curb that rapid increase in long-term housing costs, particularly if localities are provided with the technical assistance and support they need to operate a successful land bank. A second, less robust option to address land costs would be for the state to work with counties to incentivize the coordinated release of vacant or abandoned properties to nonprofit developers at low or no cost. This could be as simple as a locality providing first right of refusal to a nonprofit developer. This tactic could be further enhanced if there are mechanisms by which the state could also pay nonprofit developers back for the public good infrastructure costs accrued as part of a project. These are just two strategies we could consider to reduce current and future land costs and invigorate the production of housing stock. The second primary barrier our partners are observing as it relates to rapid increases in affordable housing or costs to build are complex financial tools and limited flexible funding. Beyond land costs, traditional for-profit developers have access to existing internal capital or private investors. Nonprofit developers stack a variety of funding sources ranging from private capital to federal and local funding, tax credits, or grants to finance a build. Each of these funding sources comes with their own application and disbursement process. They can require additional activities with associated costs. Environmental studies is one example. They have different limits on what the funding can be used for and varied guidelines on who the final product can be sold or rented to. These funding streams are rarely aligned, meaning one project could have 3 different funders and 3 different sets of requirements. They have nominal margins for either profit or loss, and when all is said and done, none of these funding sources are expected or guaranteed to cover the full cost of a project. So, as costs have increased, the ability of these tools to cover the full cost of a building or rehab has greatly diminished. For multifamily rental projects, the challenge to capital stacks have an even greater complexity that impacts the preservation of existing affordable housing units. Many of these use federal funding, and they have to be able to keep enough liquid capital on hand to buttress against future costs, a new HVAC, a new roof. They're also forced to continue to pay the upkeep, the maintenance, those annual expenses that increase each and every year. Yet rent for affordable units remains the same. Without progressive increases in the wages of residents and subsequent increases in rent, owners reach a point where the cost to maintain a property exceeds the revenue they're able to earn. This is why many affordable housing units shift to market rate when the required affordability period ends. So put simply, our best partners to help resolve the affordability challenge, meet families where they're at, are the ones who face among the greatest financial and operational barriers to build their capacity and keep pace with demand. We have to invest in simple, straightforward, and flexible funding streams that are tailored to fill these financing gaps, increase output, and build internal capacity. One of the mechanisms we could consider would be for the state to increase recordation fees and allocate any new funds specifically for affordable housing creation. At present, recordation taxes in Tennessee consist of 2 separate taxes, the realty transfer and the indebtedness tax. Without boring you to tears with all of the details, we know that a modest increase in this fee and an expansion of activities allowed under the Affordable Housing Trust Fund would facilitate greater speed in the delivery of affordable housing units statewide, but particularly in rural and undersourced communities. As context, last year, Kentucky explored increasing their mortgage fees from $6 to $12. This year, they're actually considering going as high as $18 per $100 of indebtedness. Alabama is looking at a similar process of increased fees to support their Affordable Housing Trust Fund. In closing, we have a real chance to avert the housing market disasters that are profoundly impacting other parts of the country, but it will necessitate fast action, a willingness to think creatively, and build developer capacity at scale. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. Next, Julie Keel. Glad you made it, Julie, safely.
Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here today representing neighbors in Grandin County and the organization for which I work, Mountaintop. I believe housing is key to human flourishing, and I'm so grateful to be able to share with you today about my little corner of Appalachia. Mountaintop is a 49-year-old Christian nonprofit partnership ministry. We seek to meet the physical, spiritual, social, and emotional needs of our neighbors. Our work is mostly in the realm of housing affordability through repair and rehab of single-family owner-occupied homes. Utilizing a stack of state and federal grants, private dollars, and philanthropy to purchase building materials, we were able to mobilize a multi-state volunteer force to make homes healthier, safer, more accessible, and more affordable. Mountaintop is a backbone nonprofit in our neighborhood, and because we view housing as a social driver of health, we've been able to directly and indirectly support a variety of community-based endeavors. Mountaintop's work, its work itself and in our service area, those things are both affected by the same laments you have heard yesterday and today. Organizationally and communally, we've been negatively impacted by the housing supply challenge, the increase in costs in building materials, and the sharp rise in land cost. Moreover, we've experienced this with little or no affordable housing development, particularly in the single-family sector. 3 weeks ago, 61 people representing 43 organizations gathered online and in person at our second annual Housing Summit. I'd like to share a little bit about our discussions there. We believe that we should continue to honor cross-sector community-based innovations by outcomes and not output. Let me give you an example. Earlier this year, working with partners in substance use disorder recovery community, we're able to submit a grant for permanent affordable housing for people re-entering the workforce. Unfortunately, our grant was not funded. Our grant proposal, we got the feedback that it was great, but it was the most expensive of all of the proposals given to the state. At first, I attributed this to the lack of our experience and our capacity in housing development. As I mentioned, Grundy County does not have a community housing development organization. We have not had a steady flow of investment, private or public, in workforce housing that matches the disinvestment and geographical discrimination we have historically experienced. A few weeks later, I was sitting in the room with another person from a state-level organization advising our county on our opioid settlement dollars. And she said that no one does affordable housing in rural places because it's just too expensive. Instead of valuing housing affordability by the number of beds or units produced, we have to find a way of valuing our developments by the same cross-sector impact out of which they are created. Because we know that our personal and communal health is driven by multiple factors, I believe that it's too expensive not to factor in these cross-sector collaborations and impacts. As organizations seeking funding, we are required to show on the front end that we are collaborating on projects. However, in my experience, the same impact of collaboration is rarely valued on the back end by those who are deciding where the dollars go. Mountaintop has a version of this assessment. On average, I know that a volunteer paying $225 to stay at our camp and be deployed to a work site working a total of 16 hours will turn that $1 an hour investment into $3,803 in short and long-term impact for a family in Grundy County. And that does not factor in, like I said, all of the social drivers of our health that might positively be impacted by a more standard place of living. In 2021, we conducted a housing study in Grundy County in which our data reflected that 1,041 units in Grundy County were overcrowded. The overwhelming reason for this overcrowding was not that housing is available. It was that the available housing is unaffordable and sometimes just not in a state for living in. While I believe we have gaps all across our housing spectrum, one major area that affects Mountaintop is that Mountaintop's work is that of home replacement for families living in a substandard situation who might own or be heirs of their property. At the Housing Assistance Council, they advocate for flexible funding that enables multi-year grants and ongoing support so that rural communities can attract the necessary investment, including from federal programs, and manage implementation of locally led solutions that lead to economic impact. We need both capacity building assistance along with the critical infrastructure funding to implement our experiments and innovations. I'm proud of the accomplishments we've made so far in housing affordability, and I believe that an investment in affordable housing helps us all. Thank you for your time. I would receive your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now open the floor for questions for the panelists. Councilman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot to unpack there, a lot of really good comments. It sounds like it's down in major buckets of issues, and I'm glad that Ralph brought this up because I think it's important to get it out there. You know, we've got these three big buckets we're really addressing, which is affordable housing, workforce housing, and then middle housing for the middle upper middle class. And I think the mayor of Rutherford said it best: is there's not a cookie cutter solution because everybody's dealing with different types of problems, perhaps with some overlap, whether you're Rutherford, you've got pressure because you've got all this workforce housing to support the growth that's occurring in and around Davidson County, or you're in the rural areas in the eastern part of state and getting access to infrastructure and resources is different, or you're in Memphis where we have aging infrastructure because we have a depleted center city and we're trying to convince people to come back in and rehabilitate and get access to those properties. And I'm glad you mentioned the federal subsidy. The issue that we have in Memphis that we have no control over at the state either is the community development block grant program. The formula is broken. And so we have to figure out a way to try either going it alone or partner with the state for those issues. And I think for those of you that work in affordable housing will agree the lower the income, the more the subsidy. One area I will partially comment on is for-profit and nonprofit developers have the same issue. They both still have to make money. Nonprofit is just a tax status. Now, granted, they're willing to take a different return, but because they need more subsidy, the spread is still the same. So my question, and Mayor, you mentioned it, which is need more tools, and ultimately that's the question of what are the tools and the levers you can pull to do that. And I'd be curious to see what. For me as a developer, our issue is spread, right? Like we're up 400, 500 basis points, if not more, depending on the project. On the front end, the cost of commodities are coming down in lumber, so it's really a labor exasperation. So you've got two big things that I'd be interested to see you comment on, which is you've got outside infrastructure when you've got multiple people coming back into the area and you're starting to build out, meaning your storm, your sewer, your electrical grid, your schools, those things. But then you have developers that are trying to develop new subdivisions. And for them, when the spreads go like they have as rapidly as they have and the incomes aren't there, cost of land goes up. The most important thing is your cost of debt, right? And it's usually putting in the infrastructure, right? So if I build a 400-home subdivision, I may have $30-40 million in streets, roads, sewers, and gutters just on my property, let alone tapping into the city's sewer system. So I'd be curious to know your thoughts on if the General Assembly were to look at some form of a low-interest loan program that would allow grants to go to local development agencies that they could make loans that the state could then be paid back for, but would cut the spread down. We do it often. I think we had a program for stormwater that was ultra low. We were able to take advantage of the state's balance sheet, and then those loans will be paid back by the municipalities. Are those the tools that you think could help both the affordable housing and the capital stack, as well as the workforce and middle housing, to look at providing developers, some sort of infrastructure loan where they could pay the state back, so the state's just not out the cash, and I'm sure they'd want it to be non-recourse, but one detail at a time.
Well, actually, and I'll take that if y'all don't mind. My counterpart in Oklahoma, they received some funding from the General Assembly. And one of the things they're doing with that is offering 0% construction loans to developers, primarily incentivizing starter homes, 1,200, 1,400 square feet, that sort of thing. And that would revolve. I mean, we don't have a specific revenue stream that would be big enough to really make an impact at our agency. But for example, if we did, those construction loans, they revolve every 9 or 12 months. With a one-time appropriation, we could revolve those funds long into the future. And, for someone like United Housing in Memphis, they're currently working on 11 homes. If we could provide that kind of financing to them, they'd save $66,000 on that, which can make some difference. It might also be an incentive for smaller builders to get back into the market and do some of the infill development on vacant lots that are particularly important in Memphis. But this can also be an incentive in rural areas.
One more comment?
Yes.
I love that. I think that's a great point. And then I think the other thing too that has been lost, and if you don't work in the world, you don't realize it, but whether you're a company looking to relocate or you're a developer looking to build, you're looking for the most streamlined, risk-adverse path possible. The more disruption and uncertainty in your project, we always say time kills deals. Mm-hmm. And when you're working in the affordable or the workforce housing, new market tax credits come into play and LIHTC comes into play. And the way that those programs work, you have projects that are trying to put capital stacks together over a period of time with a lot of uncertainty of whether or not they'll be afforded those tax credits. And I'd be curious to know if any of you have formed, like in Memphis, we have EDGE, right? Like they can be the applicant for those tax credits, and then they can disperse the tax credits within the community. Are any of you looking at those programs?
There we go. So it's a form of a tool, right? That's what you're asking. And I'll start with the incentive part. So traditionally, economic development, talking with new industries, pilots, TIFs, land grants, we do that for manufacturers as an example. We've looked at doing that. In fact, had a conversation Monday with Mr. Mark Mamantov of Bass Berry Sims. He's our incentive attorney, works very closely with Tom Trent as an example as well. But as far as tax increment financing, that's what a developer in a rural area is looking for, is that cash up front a lot of times. But you can't, in our situation, or the law does not allow us to incentivize single-family subdivision development. And when we're talking to subdivision developers, they're asking for road help, or help with roads, helps with water, sewer. Of course, our utility loves extending natural gas. That's an incentive that we offer locally, but that doesn't move the needle. And so there is a structural problem there. You can do TIF for things such as commercial development and apartments, but I think someone mentioned earlier, rent in Lawrence County, for example, is not high enough to warrant a return on any investment. I don't care if you're nonprofit or for-profit. So we are looking at that. We're working on policy for that. But I want to step back to your first question just about other tools. Just getting the data is hard. You know, I can't sell to a developer. I think Julie said it, trying to attract investment. That's what economic development is at its heart, is to attract investment. We don't know what we don't know about our own market. So, for example, I believe 45 counties in Tennessee have zoning, the other, of 95. We don't know who's building what where. The only reason I know there were 888 new houses put on line since 2014 was because I called my local power company and said, how many new hookups do you have? And so, there's a data issue at its heart. And then when you look at census data, it lags. When you look at state data, it lags and doesn't capture the whole picture of what's actually happening. And so I would encourage this group to look at other data tools just to help rural communities specifically understand their market. And then that should help say, okay, well, if we are going to induce with, like, let's say, TIF or a tax credit of some sort, maybe a pilot, you might want to understand how many units you want and need. And so you can't do that without understanding your market. So I think it's good to step back and talk to that.
Any other questions? Yes, Representative Hazelwood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. McDonald, you'd mentioned, I believe you said that governmental fees make up 25% of home cost. Could you help me understand what pieces there are that go into that 25%? Obviously, impact fees, and maybe I don't know if you're counting regulatory requirements that might impact costs, but 25% that's a large amount. So help me understand where that's coming from, please.
Yeah, so recently, like Rutherford County, for instance, they just increased a bunch of their permitting fees. So whenever you add all those together, for instance, these are all per square foot as well. So like a remodel, $74 a square foot. So all of these fees added together come up with that. And you can just, gas permitting fees, so plumbing fees, $175, permitting, that's for the whole house. Additional remodels, $110, gas permit is $40 a base fee, plus $650 per fixture. Then you have $35 per ton on the HVAC or mechanical equipment. Solar panel installation is $25 base fee plus $5 a panel. Retaining wall is $25 base fee plus $1 per linear foot. So, you can go down the line, and once you add all those together and you add that on top of a cost of a house, it's significant.
Representative Williams.
Thank you. Director Perry, good to see you again. Good stuff. Quick question for you about the revolving fund that you saw in other states. It's been my experience that anytime we incentivize things, it seems like that the number, they really don't have an impact in the overall reduction of cost. How long have they had those revolving funds?
They're just getting it started.
Okay.
I'll see my counterpart in Oklahoma in a couple of weeks and talk about it.
Be great to know if he's tracking what the cost of single-family residence would be currently, and then what the cost or the sales price, the fair market value of those houses would be that are using those revolving funds as comparatively speaking. It seems to me that in a lot of ways that what's exacerbating the problem is that the numbers aren't coming down regardless of whether you got a great interest rate or a high one. They're all high. So even though you might get a low interest rate loan or a zero interest rate loan, what residential development I've done for myself, it seems like the only person winning is the bank. But it didn't really change. It really didn't change the overall value of the property, regardless of the deal I did at the percentage rate. Mr. McDonald, I had a follow-up question to Chairlady Hazelwood's question for you. As it relates to the overall impact fees, has those impact fees? You said that I think you said that the real estate market was flat. Was flatter than it had been in the past? Is that because the number of housing units are not on the market, or is that because there's availability? I'm trying to figure out what's causing it to be flat. Because in most communities, in my community, the issue is that people that have a home say, if I want to downsize, that's great. But if I downsize, I'm going to pay the same thing for half the house that I currently have. And I'm really not, it's really dumb to move at this point.
Yeah, so just for instance, so take that $71,000 of annual income, right? Well, on a $300,000 purchase with 20% down, that's a $60,000 down payment. So that principal and interest, and I just did this yesterday, so we had up-to-date information, is $1,678. That's principal and interest. But then that total payment with taxes and insurance is $1,928, and again, that's no debt and no HOA dues. So a more realistic scenario would be like a 3% down THDA or RD loan. That $300,000, 3% down, that's a $9,000 down payment. $2,034 for principal and interest. Plus, then you got to have $111 of private mortgage insurance. That takes that payment to $2,396. Again, that's no debt, no HOA dues. So I think what we're seeing, in my personal opinion, is your average person is buying a more expensive home, especially in Rutherford County. Where are they going to go for $300,000? So that payment more realistically is probably a $3,000 to $3,200 a month payment. That's, in my personal opinion, I think that's why we're seeing the market flat.
Yeah.
Those interest rates at 7.55, I mean, who's buying unless they have to? I mean, and in my personal experience, we're seeing people that are moving from California or New York. Those are the people that are buying right now. Other than that, I don't think like our average Joe's just not moving to just move.
Right. I found too that most of the people that are buying undeveloped property right now are people moving from out of state, or they're people who are already in a multifamily or a large infill development process, and they're just reinvesting money for tax purposes. And so it's just driving up the overall cost. So the big challenge is, how do we do that? I guess the follow-up on the cost of the house, if those numbers that you just told us under the current market conditions, if the cost of that home were reduced by 25%, do you think it would help or would it hurt?
I think that just takes us back to pre-pandemic levels. I mean, it was a more vibrant real estate market at that point. You know, there was negotiations happening on both sides, so it was a fun market to sell real estate in. And now during COVID, obviously there was no negotiations. Everybody was doing whatever they had to do to get a house, overpaying and so forth. And so now we're just seeing, I think what we're seeing too is realtors are having to get more aggressive on how they price a home instead of just like, hey, here's a target, we're throwing it out there, see if somebody will bite. So we see price reductions, but I don't think they're true price reductions. I think they're realtors having to get down and dirty on their numbers and actually go back to really working and doing hard numbers instead of just throwing a target out there.
It's interesting as a contractor, developer, I think it's interesting to hear someone talk about his own industry and real estate, says they had to go to work. Finally, the final reason for the question about the 25% is, you communicated with Chair Lady Hazelwood that 25% of the cost of the house is these impact fees. I mean, you could easily make the argument that the impact fees are exacerbating the problem right now, overinflating the value of properties and making it very difficult for people to be able to afford entry-level homes. It's kind of like, pick your poison at this point. And so if you could reduce the overall cost by 25%, maybe that's the case. So it's a big difficult situation. Obviously it's one that's going to take this committee and our crack research staff a lot of time, but I don't want to envy them at all, but I appreciate that very much.
And can I, to your point on that, so National Home Builders Association put out a statement not too long ago that said that according to a recent National Association of Home Builders, a $1,000 increase of a median price home pushes out 127,560 people from being able to afford that home. So what we did is we look at that and we said, okay, well, what does that really mean? And, you know, when you look at these numbers and you go, well, we've had a 5.8% increase over housing this year in Tennessee, it pushes out a lot of people.
I said that was going to be all, but the challenge too is, as somebody in the construction business, it doesn't matter if it's a Habitat house that we're trying to build for $225,000 in rural Tennessee. The very fact that, as Chair Lady Hazelwood and our finance and Commissioner Bryson are trying to do capital projects, it's just unheard of to see over a 2-year period the cost of construction services to go up 42%. Right. So that's not the fault of any impact fee or anything like that. It's just the nature of where business is now, and what's happened there is the biggest. That's been the greatest detriment to low-income housing as it is anybody. So, thanks.
Senator Yarbrough, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a lot of you, I mean, we talked a little bit about just we don't have enough housing, especially in these high-demand areas. The demand for housing is far outstripping the supply, and trying to figure out, like, what are the real barriers there, and obviously land cost is real. I was struck, Mr. Perry, by your statement that, you know, Habitat to build a house costs $200,000. So if you're building single-family residences, I mean, in the traditional model, like, is it possible? Like, is it going to be possible for us to build the affordable and workforce housing supply that we need, or do we have to expand what the types of housing available are?
Well, I think in a place like Nashville, where the price of land is very expensive, unless there's more use of things like land banking or making land state or city-owned land available to a developer with conditions attached, you know, that you're going to build something that's smaller. You know, I think the size and type of the unit sort of puts a limiter on the upscale price that you're going to get for that. But I think reducing some of those costs, land, we hope to get one of the big Home Builder Institute training centers here in Nashville next year, bring 500 people skilled in the building trades into the industry each year, take some of the pressure off the cost of labor. Materials are going to cost what they build, and if there's some financing tools and tax advantages that would flow with that, a number of things would have to go together. But, you know, in other areas, if you're trying to build one home in Hancock County, 2 ridges removed from the interstate, chances are that's going to cost you more to build than it will appraise for. So unless there's some subsidy there, no one's really going to build that house. The same would be true in some inner city neighborhoods of Memphis. So a different approach is required there. That's why I think in my remarks I wanted to emphasize a lot of this is best decided at the local level. You know, what is your community specifically facing? You know, in a higher cost market, you know, like Mayor Moore has, you know, you have the impact fees, but they easily get absorbed into the price of the house based on what's being sold in Franklin, Williamson County. 5 or 6 years ago, Cheatham County imposed impact fees, and the next year, I'm told, they got exactly 1 building permit issued the whole year. So what works in one place might need to be approached differently somewhere else. So I think, you know, maximum flexibility for cities and counties to tackle the challenges they see in the way that they think best fits their community.
And I'm curious if you could elaborate, and actually, Mayor Moore, I would love for you to jump in here too, because you mentioned that we needed to give local governments greater flexibility. What does that mean? Like mechanically, technically, what does it mean for the state to provide greater flexibility for local governments here?
Well, as I mentioned, one of the tools we had that we were utilizing was inclusionary zoning, which most of the developers paid the fee, and we were able to use those fees to help supplement affordable housing in our community. If we could use density bonuses, that would be an opportunity. Actually, the annexation law has created challenges for us because the way you grow orderly is concentric rings going out from the city, and being able to annex property as a city rather than by property owner request was a way for us to orderly develop and install utilities, particularly sewer, which is so expensive to install.
Can I ask one more? Let me ask one more. So obviously, Mayor, you talked a lot. You obviously care about trying to develop affordable housing, but you also, you've got a county that uses impact fees. How do you reconcile those two things, and how do impact fees really, what do they facilitate in the way that Franklin's growing?
Well, to me, the impact fees are shifting the cost of adding additional services to the developer, and it's not putting it on the property tax where it'd have to go if we didn't have those impact fees.
Mr. Peach, you're recognized.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Perry. That was one thing I kind of wanted to ask Mr. McDonald, being in Rutherford County. You said on a home that's $400,000, the average impact fee at least from Smyrna, I know, is going to range from $3,800 to $5,700, so about 1%. We spoke with Mayor Carr yesterday about there's a balance between the affordability for those already living in Rutherford County versus prospective residents of Rutherford County because of the schools, all these things that are impacted. Do you believe that it's the cost of building the homes and all these increases that we've seen is what's maybe causing it to be a little flat, even though Rutherford's still the fastest growing that I'm aware of? Or do you think this $3,000 to $5,000 is what's keeping people from buying a home?
I mean, I think currently right now we would say interest rates. If we were in a different market, I would argue that any fee added to the homeowner is probably going to put them out. I mean, there again, any $1,000 added to a home price puts out over 127,000 people. So if you think about that, statistically speaking, I think any fee that's added to that can definitely put enough people out.
Okay. And the average, and this is not, I don't mean the way it's going to come across, but the average realtor fees is going to be 6% on those sales, correct?
That's a negotiated fee, but yes, depending on the brokerage by brokerage, yes, that fee could be 6%.
Right. So I mean, and that's not to throw it all on the realtors. I know they have to make a living, but I think it's all of these things. And like when the homes go up because of the value, because everyone's trying to get into Rutherford County, those existing residents also have, you know what, they may have lived there for 20 years in the same home, but now it's doubled in value. So guess what? Their insurance is doubled. Their assessment, even though that first year or two, they may try to balance it out, it's going to continue to climb because their value is going greater. Not to mention the trash issues we have in Rutherford County. But I guess my point for bringing that up is one of the issues that we were to look at is about impact fees and how that addresses affordable housing. And I think a lot of times people are looking at new affordable housing where it's getting really difficult for someone on a fixed budget, especially the elderly, to be able to afford their insurance and those types of things. And I think, obviously, the other side of the impact fees, development fees, whatever you want to call it, is it may not pay for all of it, but pay for a little bit of share of building the amount of the schools that we're having to build, the roads, the infrastructure, the policemen, the firemen, those types of things. And I would think that would also, in those types of infrastructure needs and safety needs, would also invite those that want to move there because of those services. But that's more of a statement, obviously, than a question. But I appreciate your time and coming.
Thank you, Mr. Peach. Representative Williams, you had a follow-up?
Well, yes, I apologize to the committee, but we are having a hearing. The quick question, Mayor, or maybe county mayors or mayors that are on the committee can answer. I know as a former city councilman, part of property tax, goes to schools or ECD or different piles of money make up the tax rate and how that money has to be spent. Does anyone have affordable housing, or is that a possibility that you could actually designate a part of your property tax so that it's spread over the whole constituency as it relates to property tax, and then through that you could generate your own, either over a period of time, a fund that you would have later on? Has anybody done that, or no?
Any mayors? Councilman?
Thank you. So we created the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and you asked me, and I didn't fully understand the question when you asked me. So what we've done is, as pilots have rolled off, those cents have gone to things like childhood pre-K. And so what we'll do is, we'll take 1 cent that will roll off, and that cent will be dedicated by ordinance, almost like an enterprise fund. Right. It can be changed by ordinance. The issue that we found is that it's a slow ramp up. So eventually it will be there, but now it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars building as those things kind of take off. So we've tried to peel a cent here or a cent there, and we try and state that in your tax bill.
Just as a point of idea, if we're coming up with ideas, if you had a long-term solution like that and then a short-term capital injection like Director Perry was talking about, maybe you could meet a short-term need with a long-term goal that might work better. I just didn't know if they had the ability to do that. And then, Mayor, Chair Lady Hazelwood and I had a great opportunity of sitting through many discussions with Mike Carter about annexation and the late, great Mike Carter. And being a former city councilman who voted to annex by ordinance, I understand how much easier that is, probably than most people. But you gave an example of it being out. So would that property be outside your urban growth boundary, or would it be in your urban growth boundary? It's just not contiguous to your current city property.
I think generally it would be inside the urban growth boundary, but as you're aware, there is an opportunity to annex non-contiguous property, and that's one of the problems we're seeing is a 450-acre property that wants to develop, and probably would build homes that are more toward the workforce range, but it's so expensive to get the sewer there at this point because you got a big gap you got to go through to get that sewer there. Mm-hmm. And the developer can't justify it in his pricing, and we can't justify it in our budget.
Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily a mechanism it's more of a mechanism of cost than it is, because if that's a one single property, then if that property owner wanted to be annexed, they could under current statute. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Waters, you're recognized.
Thank you. This is for Director Perry. Before I say that, I want to brag on Director Perry and his staff. We've been working with him in particularly since the fires we had in Gatlinburg and in Sevier County. And a lot of times you have agencies that are very difficult to work with, and there's a lot of red tape. But Director Perry and his staff have done a good job in streamlining a lot of that. And us being able to work with them, it's been a positive experience, so I appreciate THDA. My question to you would be, we've talked about the revolving loan being a tool. Is that the major tool that you think that THDA could utilize to improve affordable housing? And if it's not, what would you consider a tool that you don't have now to be something that if you did have, would have a positive impact on providing housing in Tennessee?
Well, I was real interested in the Oklahoma approach, where they're going to limit the cost of the finished product by the conditions. If you're taking the 0% financing, you're going to build a home of certain specifications that when it's done, it's more likely to sell at a price that the entry-level buyer can afford. I mean, the market is always going to set the price of the home. I mean, if it costs $300,000 to build something and we sell it to someone for $200,000, 6 months they're going to flip that house and walk away with our subsidy. So that makes no sense to me. But if on the front end we say, we will help you with the financing and maybe some other incentives, but what you're going to build is 1,200 feet, 1,200 square feet, and that perhaps limits the price that would be charged. It's an interesting approach. I want to learn a little bit more about how Oklahoma is approaching it and what kind of results they're already seeing. But it's something a number of us are interested in. You know, if I were the emperor of ice cream and had a great deal of money, you know, I noticed when my friends in Virginia were trying to lure Amazon to Alexandria, one thing that closed the sale is the Virginia Housing made a $50 million commitment to affordable housing so people weren't displaced when all those high-dollar Amazon jobs showed up. Now, you know, it'd be nice to do that. I'll bet Commissioner McWhorter at ECD would appreciate it if we could help them like that. But you know, these are, there are a number of ideas out there, and I think in every community it takes a number of things. Can we make the land a little more affordable? Can we examine the local rules? Does everything have to apply on every development? I mean, I live in Nashville. I'm all for requiring adequate parking if someone's going to build a big building, but we had to put an extra $500,000 into a building that we helped support for previously homeless veterans, none of whom owned a car. You know, just the flexibility to examine, does everything have to apply in every instance? And then, you know, what are the financing tools that might make the build itself a little more affordable? I think we have a good amount of resources for people then who wish to buy that home. So, I mean, it's a combination of those things, but thank you for your question, and thank you for the compliments.
Is that all, Mayor Waters? Okay. Mayor Anderson?
Madam Chairman, I apologize, first of all, for being late. The city mayors had all the traffic going on in Franklin and in Nashville, and I apologize for that. Let me address your question. There are some avenues Dr. Moore and I work together very good, I think, in the housing area and a lot of other areas. We're actually redoing our urban growth boundaries as we speak. But in the area of affordable housing, the way our contract was written, it gives the flexibility to the county to not charge those fees. And there's a very large housing development off of Hillsborough Road that we will not charge those fees that are from the county side. On a qualified, there's steps to have to go through. You understand that, but that will result in, if my memory serves me correct, I was trying to pull it up, about $800,000 worth of fees on this multiple good-sized location. So we're giving it up because that's the right thing to do, to try to help from the county side to the city side, because in the unincorporated area, we're all on septic tanks, so you just can't get density there. The other thing you asked, are there programs out there? This is a shout out to David Connors and a few of them that they've made it aware. In our county, we have tax relief for the elderly, tax relief. We have 3 or 4 different labels that we put on it, and all of those are on age requirement and income requirement. But because of the equalization ratio that's been brought out here lately and the high value cost, we're actually seeing a drop of 35% of tax relief for our elderly, our veterans, spouses, and stuff like that. And that all falls back on the county side, not the city side. So you've got these people in our county, and we have them, believe it or not, even in Williamson County. There's about 1,500 people that are using those programs. They're going to see a reduction of 35% in their tax relief. The very people that need it. So you only have two choices. That's one, do more frequent appraisals. Well, you can't do that overnight. Or you have to go to the well and pony up to the bar. And that's what we've done. We've said, okay, they're our residents. They're long-term residents. These are people you can look and see the tax relief. They have to come in. It's all based off earned credit, so of their earnings. So it's a tough call, but there are ways to save a little here and a little there. But I think Will Denami helped us kind of evaluate that when we were going through it. And I think the largest tax relief reduction was about $350 to $500. Well, that's a lot of money to someone that's under $35,000 or whatever that number is.
Thank you, Mayor. Any panelists want to comment? Any other questions? Anyone who hasn't asked a question yet? Anyone? Okay. Mr. Peach.
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McDonald, I did want to ask about this. Have you seen an increase in Murfreesboro with these, the corporate building of homes and for rent only? Are you seeing an increase in those?
As far as rent prices?
Well, just the rent-only subdivisions that.
Are we seeing like an increase in those being built?
That's right.
Yes. I don't know the exact figure. I could get that for you, but I know that we are seeing more of those built, and I think a lot of that has to do with the affordability.
And of course, MTAR is a very good organization and an influential organization. I know that you couldn't say right now, but would you support some type of legislation that in Tennessee that could limit the ability for those types of subdivisions that discourage home ownership that are only rent only?
That we would. I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time?
Do you think MTAR would support some type of legislation in Tennessee that would put some limitations on these corporations that have rent-only single-family residential homes?
Honestly, I don't know, because it depends. I mean, a lot of that has to do with the owner. You don't want to limit somebody's ability to be able to rent their own house out if they are wanting to do so. So I think it's a case-by-case basis, honestly, I think.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Councilman.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Who's tracking, are any of you tracking CRA dollars from banks? Ralph, Fifth Third is here. It's one of the largest banks in the country.
We don't track it, but the feds do.
Okay. Well, it's one of the, you say that. I mean, I know we obviously we have a very close relationship with First Horizon in Memphis. And one of the things that I hear talking to Brian and David Popwell is getting those dollars out, especially in our community. I mean, I think Fifth Third is bypassing some parts of Tennessee and going down to Mississippi because of the way that they're structured. And so I would ask that, that'd be something that you guys look at is how does the, how do certain, I guess, entities within the state government help track and partner and facilitate that relationship, especially with affordable housing developers and workforce housing developers that make sure that CRA, because maybe the government doesn't have to have the SRF. Maybe it's, hey, we just need to make sure that we're going to our banking partners and look, they've got a mandate by the federal government to get it out. It's just one of those things where it's not a huge priority for them.
Of course, the federal government is actually looking to revise the Community Reinvestment Act, and our national association, of which I happen to be chairman, we're following that very closely, because if they change and broaden the types of things banks can get CRA credit for. Our concern is they will rack up their points doing easy things rather than the more challenging things of investing in affordable housing. So that's, that is, I think, out for public comment in any of your communities that wish to weigh in on that. But CRA is important for us because outside of our large cities, the people buying the tax credits that make our developments work are often local banks, and they do that to get the local CRA credit.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions myself. One of the topics that's not been raised at either yesterday's panel or today's is manufactured housing. And in our county, as an example, the manufactured housing industry is big business. We have a manufacturer there. A lot of folks choose that the mobile home or the modular home, the manufactured home, as a affordable option or an affordable option, and they can obtain financing through that. And I'm wondering to the discussion about the compliance costs, whether we're talking permitting, all of the inspections, is that an affordable option because that industry has figured a way around the compliance costs that go into the traditional stick build model or apartment complex? Can anyone address that? Yes, sir.
So thinking about that specific model, the municipalities in my community aren't really friendly to that type of development, but to answer your question directly, yes, it is a viable option, especially for people that may be displaced as neighborhoods are redeveloped, gentrification as an example. But specifically in my community and all of Lawrence County, what we've noticed is we're kind of skipping right over the mobile home community, and we're going to like RV parks. I'm not sure if you're seeing that in your community. I think there's like 350 lots under development right now out in the county. And so the concern for us on that front is that's not even a house, right? That's a RV, and there's a place for that. Workers maybe building Ultium cells in Spring Hill don't want to rent in Spring Hill. They may want to just come down the road and drive 40 minutes and park their RV and go home on the weekends, as an example. That's another form of workforce housing that is more temporary, but then you, of course, get into the hospitality space, right? You charge lodging tax on a campground, as an example. So there are other issues, but I do think it is a viable option, especially as people are displaced.
Thank you. And Ryan, we're actually, I know several of the mayors here, we have spoken about this. It's just a growing, in some cases it's a problem because, you're not set up properly for sewer and things like that. So we're having a lot of those discussions, but there is space for that, especially with some of the workforce that's more transient in nature. Another question I have is on the effects of COVID really amplified the remote worker. And given the state of housing costs nationally, Tennessee has become a magnet for a lot of people who would love to move to Mayor Waters County and sit atop a mountain and look at beautiful sunrises and sunsets and the fall colors, but they're working in Colorado. Do we have any way to measure how many folks are living here in Tennessee but are working somewhere else? And is that something that's able to be tracked? Is it something like the internet sales tax where, we're all here talking about greater subsidies for making housing here affordable, but if people are working in another state but living here, what do we do? Is there room for the state to step in? And does anyone know, are we tracking that? Are you able to track that with your data?
I'll take that one as well. In Lawrence County, this was a post from 2022, and so it lags quite a bit. So let me preface an answer by saying, yes, there's a way to track it. In 2017 to 2020, we saw 832 more remote workers in Lawrence County. It's a 5% increase, and that's part of our workforce, right? That information I'll have to get back with you on where that came from. I can tell you it was provided by TVA's economic development arm. So, you know, if you have a good relationship with them, they can pull it. But I'll figure out what the source for that is. I would anticipate it's probably increased even in my community, just because we've seen co-working spaces come in and coffee shops and people, it maybe not fully remote, but even working hybrid, you know, working up here in Nashville 2 days a week and 3 days from home. So yes, there is a way to track it. I'm not sure exactly what the source is, though.
And this is just kind of a general question. So, you know, we've had multiple discussions today and comments about inflation, cost of supplies. Is there any estimate from any panelist on maybe the percentage of the issue that we're dealing with right now is just taking time for the market to catch up? I mean, is that a possibility? We have inflationary pressures. There's also a little bit of currency devaluation going on. Is some of it that Tennessee is growing post-pandemic to a level that there is some gap there that eventually people are going to get to work and be building more? Do we have any estimates of that? Director Perry, you look like you might have a comment.
Estimate, but you know, this is a supply and demand thing, and it is just going to take some period of years. I mean, you can look at the national home building figures from 08 and 09, and it crashed. And it's only recently, in the last year or two, when home building of all types has started to approach the level we were seeing in 07 and 08. It's just going to take time to increase the supply. You know, my point today is that most of what's being built right now is aimed at the higher end. The market's always going to take care of that. But we also have a big need for folks in that moderate middle income range. We have some tools to help lower income folks, but that's where we need more, and that's where the thought given to various kinds of incentives, and there's a role for what we can do at the state level, there's a role for the federal resources that we administer, but there's also some help we can get from cities and counties based on what fits in your community and what you need to see.
Okay, thank you. And I have just a couple more quick ones. Yesterday and today, comments were made about local government can address some of this with friendlier zoning. Is there a way, so for instance, if we have advocates who are saying, well, we're needing subsidy in order to create affordable housing, is there a way to incentivize local government to provide friendlier zoning? So for instance, I think of ECD and the 3-star. You check certain boxes, you get greater percentage of, you know, for a CDBG match or something like that. Is there a way to ask a county, do you have appropriate zoning that's friendly to workforce housing? I mean, is that something that might be workable?
Well, the federal government is proposing such a thing, incentives for grants that they would make available to local governments that also are providing a little more zoning flexibility. But I think really this is something that's going to be decided locally. You know, in some places, no matter how you zone it, if a piece of land costs a certain, if it costs you $3 million to get a small piece of land, you can't put a pup tent on it and have it be affordable. So this is going to be more useful in some communities than others, but I think the federal government, I'm not sure where the federal budget is today, but it is proposed that there would be grants available to local communities that are interested in doing such a thing. But that wouldn't be necessarily the kind of thing we would directly incent through our agency, at least.
Okay.
We give density with the zoning, and certainly if they can build more houses, that lowers the overall cost for the land for each lot.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Ron.
thinking about your question is how do you encourage local governments to do that? And you mentioned ECD specifically. Pre-2015, the State Department of Economic and Community Development had a whole team of planners. I believe there were about 100 of them. They no longer exist, and so there's no one even to bring awareness to the issue from the state level, from a department perspective. It really is left to local economic development organizations to at least have the conversation. And in my graduate research, not every county has a local economic development organization. So I would encourage you to maybe have a discussion about maybe re-implementing and encouraging just the awareness and education about that. Of course, I would echo the director in that it is a local issue and it takes some political capital. If you're going to, again, if you're one of the counties like mine that don't have zoning, you have to expend some political capital to do that. Does zoning also include codes? I can tell you that's a hard no in Lawrence County. If you were to put zoning and codes in the same sentence, it's political suicide. So you really have to have some more education on that front, and that's going to take some time. But I think there's a place for the state to do that.
Okay. And my last comment or question is in regard to a lot of the national coverage on institutional investors buying up housing and hedge funds, equity funds. What is Tennessee seeing in that regard? Are we seeing that? And what do you think the impact is on the state? Is it harmful to the local community to have, big outside organizations buying up housing, or are we not seeing it here? Just any comments from any of the panelists?
Yes. Yes, definitely. We're seeing it in Grundy County. I don't have any numbers, but I can tell just researching and looking at properties and trying to figure out who actually owns this piece of property and where they located. It's a big mystery. And so even removing property off of, the ability for us to purchase that might not be the most ideal to develop. Like, we're an organization that'll take a small piece of property and try and figure it out. And so just when you remove those big tracts of land off the rolls for whatever reason, investing or it creates such a crunch for even the smallest of organizations trying to contribute something to the affordable housing.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah,
Director Perry?
We've had some interaction with that. You've got a couple of things going on. Some of those are just small investors, folks who buy 10 or 12 properties, tend to be a little more attentive to them. In other areas, you have investors just buying them up. They're not particularly good landlords. And, particularly in Memphis, there are a lot of places where we're concerned they are taking inventory that would otherwise be available to a lower income first-time home buyer. But, to Mr. Peach's point, what you see in Rutherford County, the big operators are shifting their business model. They find that they get a lot more pushback if they're going into an established homeowner neighborhood and buying up 3, 5, 8 houses. Their better business model going forward is develop subdivision on our own and offer those for rent. And you'll see a few of them actually getting into offering this as, this is a first step. Rent with us for a few years and we'll set you up for home ownership. Like any industry, you have some very reputable players who are going, people want to rent. They don't want to be in an apartment. They can't afford to buy yet. This is a free market and valuable addition. There are also some fly-by-night operators who take less care of the property and care less about the neighbors, and that's some of what you've seen in parts of Rutherford County, I think.
Thank you, Director Perry. Mayor Anderson.
You just made me think, are these
That's good. Do I get a point for that?
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. So these multi-family units that are purchased, are they taxed at 25 or 40% for valuation?
Based off of my knowledge from talking to our Rutherford County tax assessor yesterday, depending on how many units are owned in one specific under one roof. So, for instance, he mentioned if they own 10 units in a townhome community and it's under one roof, they would be taxed at 40%. I actually just dealt with this because it was zoned commercial, and I couldn't figure it out because we were trying to sell it, and it's a single unit. Well, they had been paying commercial tax on it since 2015, and nobody knew. But so homeowner hopefully will get a tax break on that back. But the way that he explained it is if they were to own over 25% of the community under one roof, then it would be taxed at 40%. Under that would be at the 25.
As a follow-up, so that if you own 10, if you were an outside investor and you bought 10 individual single-family homes, you would be taxed at?
I would need to get clarification on that, but if it was in one neighborhood, the way that I understood it is it would be taxed at the 25%. If it's under one roof as a townhome, then it would be.
Mayor.
I just wanted to comment that in Sumner County, even if it's a duplex, not commercially zoned, it's in a neighborhood, but they know it's an income-producing property, it's taxed at 40%.
Mr. Denami, I know you're not a panelist, but okay.
Who enforces that? I'm way offline, but who enforces that? Your property assessor? Your property assessor? It's coming up for election. Thank you.
Representative Williams, you're recognized.
I just wanted to, on the large infill development selling to large corporations, it is a problem, it's a fast-growing problem in the state. The legislature has had a little bit of discussion as it relates to that. I think it would be good for the CTAS, MTAS, TML, and those of the like to get a unified idea of what they think about it. The legislature has taken a stance recently as it relates to limiting the ownership of land as it relates to foreign governments. And so there's a precedent there to set some kind of standard. I think it's obvious that we need some kind of standard. I don't really know what that is, but I do know that in the areas in which Mr. Peach was talking about is some grave concern where someone comes in and goes to a developer and says, I know you've gone through all the permit process and I'm going to give you full ask on these 125 houses and I'll pay your full asking price, and it'd be very hard for any developer to say no. So if there was a limit on the percentage or something like that one company could do, and a discussion as to whether that company had to be domiciled in Tennessee would be also a limiting factor. So I think it's something we definitely need to discuss.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions for the panelists? Panelists, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your testimony here today. Safe travels.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, tab 8, Bob Morio, Research Manager, Emergency Communications on College and University Campuses. We have a draft report for review and comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Today I'm presenting a draft of the Commission's report on emergency communications and crime reporting on college and university campuses, located behind tab 8 in your docket books. It was prepared in response to Senate Bill 2827 by Senator Hensley and House Bill 2729 by Representative Ogles, which were introduced in the 112th General Assembly and as amended directed the Commission to perform a comprehensive evaluation of the routing and storage of emergency communications at colleges and universities in Tennessee. And that was to include the ability of institutions to store data and recordings related to emergency communications, store and retrieve complaints of criminal activity alleged to have occurred on campus, and include best policies and procedures and consistency of messaging with respect to improving the ability of colleges and universities to store data recordings related to emergency communications. When these bills were introduced, the sponsors noted that some schools direct students and staff to call campus police or security departments for emergencies instead of 911. As this draft report explains, some of those campus police and security departments don't record incoming calls reporting crimes and other incidents on campus. This is in contrast with 911 calls that are answered by outside dispatchers, which are always recorded and saved. There was some concern from the bill sponsors that not recording and saving emergency calls could hinder investigations or lead to schools underreporting incidents on their campuses. In response to these concerns, staff has identified 3 recommended alternatives in this draft report intended to improve institutions' handling of emergency calls and help make parents and students more informed and aware of potential safety risks on college and university campuses. The first of these is for the state to encourage colleges and universities to record and retain recordings of calls reporting crimes and conduct violations to campus police and security departments by providing them with additional funding to help schools obtain or improve emergency call recording systems. While there are no federal or state laws that require post-secondary institutions to record calls to campus police and security, these calls may be recorded under existing law. And according to interviews and responses to a survey of public and private institutions conducted by Commission staff, many institutions in Tennessee do record these calls already, including nearly all the state's public universities, but none of the state's community colleges and only a few private institutions have told us that they do. With that said, the report notes again that most schools in Tennessee direct students and personnel to dial 911 for all emergencies, and those calls are recorded. Initial cost seems to be the primary barrier for campus police and security to record calls. Campus authorities are not part of the state's 911 network, and as such do not receive money from phone bill surcharges. The cost to implement a call recording system is driven by the number of users, level of service and features purchased, and any need for new and upgraded equipment. Research staff was able to get cost information from a few institutions about their call management systems. University of Memphis and Tennessee Tech each said that their initial startup costs were around $100,000. And annual software licensing and upkeep range from $8,000 to $27,500 a year. Schools we talked to. Smaller schools that handle infrequent emergency calls would need fewer phone lines and could expect to pay less than large universities with significant student housing populations and geographic footprints. We spoke with the Director of Campus Safety and Security for the Tennessee Board of Regents, which governs the state's community colleges and colleges of applied technology, who said it would likely not be a heavy burden to begin recording calls to campus police, though there would certainly be some cost. In the 2023 extraordinary session of the 113th General Assembly, legislators did appropriate $30 million for school safety grants available to public and private institutions of higher education, which could potentially be used for call recording systems, among many other school security efforts. However, anecdotally, we spoke to some of the schools we spoke to said they intend to pursue this funding for purposes other than call recording, things like security cameras and building access controls. So although our research found no clear evidence of higher crime rates or other public safety issues at colleges and universities that don't record calls to their campus police and security departments, the draft report describes how recording those calls could help police with investigations, help ensure compliance with federal and state crime reporting requirements, and protect institutions in case of disputes over facts of a report. So again, for these reasons, the Commission's first recommendation is for the state to encourage colleges and universities to record and retain recordings of calls reporting crimes and conduct violations to campus police and security departments by providing additional funding to help schools obtain or improve emergency call recording systems. Next, the report explains how separate but similar federal and state laws require colleges and universities to report statistics and other information about crime and safety on campus. These are covered in detail on pages 14 through 25 in the draft. Representative Ogles, one of the sponsors who sent us this study, expressed concern that some crimes might be underreported by college and in college and university crime statistics. Rather than underreporting on behalf of campus institutions, what the draft report points out is that based on nationwide surveys, victims report less than half of violent crime to police at all, meaning crime statistics reports are only capturing a portion of actual victimizations. For many reasons, victims of sexual assault in particular are hesitant to report their assailants to authorities. A 2019 survey of students at 33 universities across the country estimated that 20% of women and a similar percentage of transgender and non-binary students experienced forced non-consensual sexual contact while enrolled at school. But only 15% of those victims contacted any sort of programs or resources, and of that small portion, only 11% went to campus police. Another recent nationwide survey of students across 383 colleges and universities revealed 14% of respondents had experienced unwanted sexual contact at some point, 19% of females and 27% for LGBTQ students, but only 6% of all victims told campus or local police. So the draft report describes how Title IX, which is part of the federal education law that requires schools to adopt and publish grievance procedures for students to file complaints of sexual discrimination, harassment, or sexual violence, how it provides victims of sexual violence with an additional avenue apart from law enforcement through which they can seek protection and disciplinary action through policies established by their institution. That 2019 study I mentioned a moment ago found that 20% of victims who did contact any sort of resource had gone to their school's Title IX office. However, at most schools, the number of these cases is not published alongside crime statistics. Some institutions, including the University of Tennessee system, are reporting them voluntarily. The federal government does not require colleges and universities to publish Title IX statistics. And there are, however, 3 states, Louisiana, Maryland, and New York, who do require schools to report this information. Giving parents and students more information about sexual misconduct reports on campus could help them make more informed choices. To supplement the crime statistics already required to be reported under federal and state law, the Commission's second recommendation is for the General Assembly to require colleges and universities in Tennessee to publish to their websites their annual statistics for complaints of sexual misconduct and assault reported to campus Title IX authorities. And lastly, the report also explains that studies have shown that college students are more likely to be victims of violent crime off campus than on campus. By virtue of how campus geography is defined under the federal and state laws, campus crime statistics that schools are required to report exclude many incidents that occur off campus. As one news story puts it, parents do not draw a distinction between on-campus and off-campus crime if it's their child who's the victim. In that 2019 AAU survey, only about half of forced incidents of sexual contact actually happened on campus and school-affiliated property. The draft report explains that because colleges and universities use the same system, TIBERS, as law enforcement agencies around the state to report crimes and locations to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the Commission's third recommendation is for TBI to include statistics for crimes reported within a half mile of each college or university campus in their annual crime on campus reports. We chose that for what is considered a generally accepted walking distance for an off-campus area. And also part of the third recommendation is to require that colleges and universities publish to their websites statistics for their institutions from this report, which they currently are only required to make available upon request. So this concludes my presentation of the draft report. I'll look forward to presenting a final report for your approval in December, and I welcome your feedback and questions at this time.
Any questions or comments? Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next, we have a panel on wastewater systems operations and finances. Bill Terry will serve as our facilitator and introduce the panel.
Off. Red light's on. Madam Chair and Dr. Lippard, members of the Commission, last January, County Executive Jeff Huffman asked us to take a look at wastewater systems and financing in the state. Do a study on that. He said that the study should examine the condition of Tennessee wastewater systems, the number of wastewater systems that have enforcement letters from TDEC, information about the governance of wastewater facilities, the structure of the governing board, members receive compensation or not, and the best practices for wastewater system management from other states, new technologies from
wastewater system management, methods of wastewater system management that have not worked and should be avoided, best methods of financing sewer lines and stormwater treatment, wastewater treatment plants, and then the best methods to reduce operating cost of wastewater systems. This came about because of a report that I wrote in 2008. And this was a simple 10-page staff research brief, and it covered problems with wastewater systems in Tennessee. And it basically is fairly simple, but I want to read one statement out of it. It says that bad sewer pipes are a problem that the country can no longer ignore, and will get worse for two simple reasons. One, most sewer pipes were built to last 60 or 50 years, and that's been that long ago. And secondly, not enough people pay attention to sewer pipes unless something goes wrong. So not much has changed, has it? We're in the information gathering phase of this study. Not too far along yet. We've interviewed a number of entities. We'll interview a lot more. We have two panelists here today. One of them is John Strickland with the City of Murfreesboro and their wastewater treatment plant. And the other is Roger Goodson with Consolidated Utility District. And Madam Chair, our panelists.
Thank you. Mr. Goodson.
Hello? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Just wanted to check in on that. So yes, I'm Roger Goodson. I'm the General Manager for Consolidated Utility District of Rutherford County. We started out, just a quick history on us, we started out in 68 as a merger of 4 small utility districts, and we're currently celebrating our 55th year as a water district. In the early 90s, with the growth that was starting to go on in Rutherford County, we submitted a permit to TDEC to try to get a discharge into the Stones River, which at that time they informed us that we would not get a discharge and we would probably never get a discharge into that river. So then we had to look at alternatives because with the county growing, they wanted needs to basically how can we continue to grow and outside of the city limits. So through the knowledge and the guidance of the then county mayor, Rhonda Allen, we chartered as the only entity outside of the municipalities that could handle wastewater and operate and own wastewater outside of the municipalities in Rutherford County. So that's really how we got into it. We are a decentralized system. So we are not the conventional system that John will talk to you more about when he does. So basically we are drip fields, we are step tanks, we are basically tanks at the homes that we own and operate and run to a treatment plant, and then we run out to a drip field where it drips into the soils. And that is how it disperses. It does not, because we cannot discharge, because TDEC will not give us discharges. Over the years now, so we've been in business, we've been doing the wastewater business now since our early ones started in early 2000s. And so we've got a lot of knowledge throughout the years. Right now we have 76 different plants that are servicing right now just under 9,000 residents right there. We also have 5 more subdivisions getting developed and systems there. So I believe when they first chartered and made one entity as the one to be able to do it, I believe they were looking out for the residents at that time, because when you have different subdivisions that may be run by different operators and things, how do you have facts that if the filter goes out or needs replaced, how is it going to have the financial ability to be able to make those repairs and not just put them on those 30 homeowners or 40 homeowners? So, and as us being in the business 25 years, you know, when we first built some of those filters and everything, they said 40 to 50 years. Well, Bill just mentioned that, you know, we're having some of those filters start to fail now. And a matter of fact, we just took a bid on replacing one of them, and it's for at least 100 home subdivision, but you know, and it's over $1.5 million, and so I couldn't see how that would be able to go on to just 100 home subdivision to make that. So I believe the county was forward looking there, but I just wanted to give you a little quick history on CUD and how we got into the wastewater business. And I'll let John talk, and then I'm looking forward to taking any questions that you all have. So,
Thank you so much. Mr. Strickland?
Good morning, everyone. So as Roger mentioned, he's a decentralized system. Our system is centralized. And what that means, in essence, is that every single drop of wastewater from the community comes to one central point, one wastewater plant. So it's very different in that standpoint, but it's also a product of a city. So like Roger's situation, Murfreesboro has grown. Most of Tennessee has grown. So we've seen this massive growth. We've had to keep up with the growth over the years. A lot of that has been the financial stewardship of the local leaders, planning out from 40, 50 years ago, staying on top of the rates, staying on top of impact fees or tap fees, that kind of thing. So financially, we've been staying on top of it. Then when you come into what are parts of the system that are working well, what are parts of the system that are having trouble? Well, it all begins, say, in the pre-treatment phase. With us being a city, we do have pre-treatment, and that's mostly for commercial entities, for industrial things. So with any sewer-type system, you want that wastewater to be what we call domestic strength. In other words, what is the type of wastewater that's going to come out of a normal house? What is that? That's what can be treated. Anything very different from that, say heavy metals, other types of pollution, exorbitant amounts of pollution, that really can't be handled in an effective way, especially since we're talking about a public facility. We want to treat everyone fairly. We can't treat their pollution, which is much higher strength, at the same rate as we're treating everyone else. So you have the pre-treatment program. That's something that's really worked well in cooperation with the state. The state, with their delegated authority from the EPA, has made the regulations. The regulations are common sense. The regulations work. They get that wastewater coming from an industrial site down to the domestic strength, and it works financially also because the industry is responsible for that. They have to get it down to that strength. So the responsible party is paying the bill, and we have an effective result. That's a big win. Then when you get down to the domestic strength, it's coming to the centralized location, to the facility. At that point, the municipality has to operate it. How well is that working? Well, it depends on the municipality. Some systems are operated better than others. There's plenty of room for improvement. The biggest thing that's happening right now is technology. So even if you have a system that's not managed as well as another system, there are opportunities to take advantage of technology and use that and ramp up very quickly to another level of efficiency. The technology is changing very rapidly in the industry. What we're seeing is a lot of financial entities have recognized the opportunities. They're coming into the space. A lot of the companies are consolidating. They're becoming bigger. Things are moving faster. So you can leverage technology to create an efficiency, create a better outcome at a lower cost. Then something that's maybe an area that needs improvement is, or there's an opportunity there, is the regulations. So when the state, with the delegated authority from the EPA, makes a rule, oftentimes that is going to dictate what the municipality has to do or what the other entity has to do. So, for example, if you do what California did when they were trying to implement some reuse situations. They dictated the technology and down to the vendor. So what did that mean? That meant it was very expensive because the vendor could dictate the price. And then everyone has to just deal with a monopoly on the price. That's probably not the best regulation. California has since backed off of that. What we've seen in regulations that work the best are the ones that offer the most flexibility, because Tennessee is covered with talent. If you give us flexibility, somebody's going to come up with a great idea, and then we'll figure ways around that. So regulations that maximize the flexibility while maintaining the integrity of the system. You know, we are in the business of protecting human health and the environment. We have to keep that in proper perspective, because sometimes the regulations veer off into protecting the environment in ways that are not conducive to humans being around. You know, obviously we have the right to be here. We have communities. We're doing these things for our communities, for our loved ones, for everyone around. And so as long as we keep that in mind, yes, we want to protect human health. But then can we create common sense regulations that put us in a situation to create creative solutions and do it in an economically sustainable way? So one of the biggest things that we've noticed is that Tennessee has a more stringent requirement for the dissolved oxygen requirements in a wadeable river than our surrounding states. It's an entire milligram per liter. So say, for example, in most cases for Tennessee, it would be 5 milligrams per liter. For the surrounding states, it's 4. So they have this advantage over us. We're the only state in this EPA region that has this more stringent requirement. That means it's greater cost to meet the requirement. That means we're maybe taking the requirement to a point that isn't quite common sense. Are we overprotecting the environment and over costing the community when those funds could be used in other ways? So that's a clear way that Tennessee has regulated us in a way that's not common. It's not in our area. It's not in the Southeast. It's not in our EPA district. And it puts us at a disadvantage from an economic standpoint, business development, and also health and human environment. When you come back around and say, hey, we do have common sense regulations, then you can create flexibility. So for example, we have a reuse system. You say, okay, we want to protect the environment. If you're discharging into the river from this massive plant that is treating every single person's waste and putting that into a single point, we can understand how, hey, that's problematic. Creatively, the state has come forward and worked with us. We can discharge some of that water onto land, into fields, on farms. Now, everything is a trade-off. There's typically no panacea, no ultimate solution. So the problem with those type of things are they're weather dependent. So when you irrigate, we know even with our own lawns, if it's been raining, you're not going to irrigate. That's a complete waste of money. But if the system has been set up so that you have to discharge in order to meet the regulations, now you're weather dependent. So there has to be some flexibility built into those regulations that say, hey, we did guide you toward this solution, and now we're going to take into account the fact that it is weather dependent. So ultimately, what I'd like to say is that for a centralized system, there are a lot of things that are working well. You have technology coming to create better efficiencies, but the biggest opportunity is how we regulate the space, because that will control the outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goodson and Mr. Strickland. Questions, comments? Executive Huffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Thanks, guys, for coming this morning, giving us the time. These two systems, they're great examples of getting it right, doing it right in the face of an awful lot of growth. So thanks for your comments and for giving us some of your time. In our area in West Tennessee, this has become a real issue because of Blue Oval City and Ford Motor Company's impact on a completely rural area. I mean, they've got 3,600 acres that was few months ago was a soybean field with no infrastructure around it. And so everyone's scrambling around off of the mega site property, trying to figure out how to handle this growth that is surely coming. And there are a lot of folks that are swarming around, buying up property, interested in developing. Farmland owners calling, say, when can you get sewer out here to my 150-acre farm? A private equity investor from California wanting to know, when's the infrastructure coming? And so all of a sudden, because the treatment plant and the 38-mile, 18-inch force main that goes from the mega site to the Mississippi River is exclusive to the mega site only, now everyone's scrambling around trying to figure out, well, what about the infrastructure in our area, which is completely, well, not completely, but mostly agricultural and flat. So that's posed all these questions. And in getting into that, the local leaders, we found that most of the municipalities in Tennessee handle wastewater sewer, particularly. Some utility districts, but mostly municipalities. And in the small towns in our area, most of them were not working right. They just weren't. They were lagoon systems for the most part. There were some that were working properly. Covington's got a mechanical system that works very well. But most of them had capacity problems. They had leakage problems. They had pump problems. They were using American Rescue Plan dollars that had been gotten to try to scotch up their systems, but the systems were just dilapidated. And it looks like that post-World War II, when a lot of these systems were put in, we finally got into the phase where you're going to have to pay some attention to this now. That's how bad it's gotten. And it also seems that on the news every week now, we hear about, whether it's in a major metropolitan area or somewhere else, these major failures of these wastewater sewer systems in a lot of areas. I mean, a lot of areas around the country now. And then you hear about the environmental impact that comes surely along with that. So we're trying to figure out two things, and that is, what do we do about these systems that aren't really working right now, and how bad is that problem in Tennessee? And I'd noticed from Bill's report from way back years ago how many enforcement letters there were then. I'm just wondering if that number has increased or decreased and how that works. These are some of the questions that I have for you guys because you know the business so well. And I went to see Roger and his folks and was very impressed with their operation. Roger, could you just tell us how it works in unincorporated Rutherford County in terms of if I'm a developer and I come to the county and I've got a 150-unit subdivision I'm wanting to build, what part does CUD play from that point going forward? Because my understanding from my talks with you all was that you don't build the systems. You oversee the construction of the systems that the developer builds, and then you take ownership after the system's built and completed. But take us through that if you would.
Sure. So, yes, thank you again, Jeff, for allowing us to come. So basically the way it works is they have to submit plans to us, and we review the soils, actually. So we have to make sure, because we are decentralized and our waste goes into the soils, we have to make sure that there's suitable soils on site for them to be able to build a step system. So,
And excuse me, you're decentralized.
Correct.
In the step system, the homeowner still has a septic tank.
They have it's a dual tank is what we use. It's not it's like a septic tank, but it actually goes into our system. So we have the pump. We own the pump. The tanks that we use are actually dual tanks, where the first one will collect the solids, the liquid will roll over, and then the pump's in the liquid one, and then that pumps into a force main that goes down to our treatment plant. Okay, the treatment plant then it treats it. It gets hit with UV, and then it goes out into the soil area, which is a drip field area, which has different zones, so that it goes in a different zone at different times, so you're not oversaturating the area and things like that. But going back to where we have the, we review the plans that they submit. We let them know how much soils is on that property that we can use as the drip fields. We as an entity, we actually require another 50% spare of the land that is able to have drip fields, just in case you ever have a problem with one of your current drip fields. As we've learned over the years, the first few, there weren't even regulations that TDEC had out there, so we've had to have excess soils and stuff. So we've learned over the years that, so yes, so then once they are approved, well, first then currently, up until about 3 weeks ago, TDEC would also come and do a quality check on the soils to make sure that they're the soils that we say they are and that the developer says they are. Well, TDEC has just recently quit doing the quality checks based on just some testimony that they had somewhere else within the within the legislation. And we are currently in the process of hiring a soil scientist because we're going to continue to require those soil or those quality control checks, because now you're going to fight developers versus us saying, well, those soils are good, these aren't. Well, we know from the past those soils aren't good. So there's many different types of soils. So anyway, so then they build their system, or they'll build our system per our specifications. We will inspect it throughout the entire process. Once it is built and it is active, that they will deed that over to us. We will require fencing. Well, we then do the fencing and everything for it because we want those properties fenced so four-wheelers aren't riding on them and things like that, because those soils can get ruined quickly, and now you have a system that doesn't work. So, and with that, and just so you know, based off of what your previous conversation was on the previous panel that you had about impact fees and things like that, all that adds up to about, depending on the size of the system, it adds up anywhere from about a $3,500 to about a $5,000 cost for each home. Okay.
Let me ask you: do you all get impact fee revenue from local government in Rutherford County?
We do not. We do not. All our that would be like their donation of that property, I would assume, and the system, I guess you could call, would be the impact fee there. But without that, they're not going to be able to, without the step system, they're not going to be able to build anyways. So, no, we are totally funded ourselves. We take bonds out. Everything we do is through our customers' rates or bonding. So we do not get any government money whatsoever, except I am getting a little bit of ARP funds that the county has given to us, which we appreciate.
Mr. Huffman, let me add that one strategy that has worked really well for Murfreesboro is the concept of new folks are buying into the system. In other words, you don't just get to come into the system and pay $40 a month. You have to literally buy into the system. Your connection did not exist before. You buy into the system. That could be a tap fee. Like Roger mentioned, that could be $3,000 to $5,000. But the bottom line ends up being that the new development buys into the system, pays their fair share. And then we move forward there, maintaining things via the rates. The other thing that I would mention is that in tight situations, sometimes you have to be a little bit creative, and it might be worth revisiting that dedicated pipeline and say that that needs to be opened up to the community. They're coming into the community. They're a community member. That may need to be revisited. Murfreesboro is in such a tight position that we're actually talking about building a pipeline a great distance away. And if that were to happen, everyone's going to want to be able to get into it, which I think would be fair so long as people bought into it. I don't see any reason why that has to be so exclusive, especially if the local governments are willing to pay their fair share, buy into it.
What's the capacity of the plant in Murfreesboro?
So treatment-wise, Tennessee has regulated us at 20 million gallons per day. Engineering-wise, it's designed for 24 million gallons per day. We average about 19 million gallons per day. But with wet weather that infiltrates the system, we have the hydraulic capacity of treating 70 million gallons per day.
So how much capacity do you have right now? If someone were to ask you generally, what's your capacity of what's available?
Well, we're at 95% capacity because TDEC says 20 million is what your permit says, and we're at 19. Now, engineering-wise, the design says 24. Due to some operational modifications, we can do a little bit better than that. But yeah, we're at just really close to capacity. Probably, if you had to give an official number, it'd be more like 80%, but that still is keeping ahead of growth, but growth is coming up so quickly that it's difficult to maintain that lead.
Yeah, a lot of municipalities will look at the cost, and of course, right now, costs are through the roof. They look at the cost of making improvements or adding capacity, and you throw in the cost of the additional operational costs that may be there, and then you throw in the dreaded depreciation rules that we hear about on a regular basis now. That aside, do you know of any technology that's available now that would help small municipal wastewater sewer systems that are struggling with how they're going to improve their system, either enlarging it or how they're going to make improvements to it, just to basically replace equipment and get a system that's efficient and running properly the way it's supposed to? Because there seems to be a lot of municipal systems, in our area anyway, that are just struggling to meet these regulations that are out there, and they just, when they put the pencil to it, you kind of throw your hands up and just say, we'll just have to take the hit. Anything that you know out there that's come up recently that would help municipalities with something like that?
I would say two things. One, first, given the fact that each plant is very different, every situation is different, there's really no standardization in the industry. But the two things are this: the state has an optimization program. I believe it's Karina Bynum is over that. And so you can actually call the state, have them come out and take a look at your system, and oftentimes they can capture operational efficiencies. So they can see the way the plant is being run. We actually sat on a board with her because she saw what we had done in Murfreesboro. And with no capital outlay, with actually saving about $12,000 a month in electricity, we changed the way the plant was operated, because that's strictly operational standpoint, and we were able to improve the efficiency of the plant for pollution removal by 200% for nitrogen and about 150% for phosphorus. Well, those are massive increases, allowing you to expand the life of the plant or expand the nominal treatment capacity. So, for example, before the program was instituted, the state said, hey, your plant is rated for 16 million. After we instituted this program, they said now it's rated for 20 million, and with our reuse system, they would accept, in some cases, 24 million. So you're talking about just an operational change that made a 50% increase in the plant without the plant actually changing it at all. You know, this is just an operational change. So that was a big win. The other thing is, if you look at the specific technology of the plant, it may be the case that all they need to do is expand, say, one basin. It could be an aeration basin, but that one basin could allow them greater flexibility in the way the things are operated. So it may not be saying, hey, how do we expand this plant altogether? Because when you have a plant, you may have 5 process units. Typically, when you expand each one of those process units.
Yeah.
But you may be able to look at it in a different way and say, hey, if we expand this one process unit just a little bit, we can gain the efficiency over the entire plant.
Yeah. Just one last question, Madam Chair, and that's it. In our region, we're looking at a regional system. Can we come up with a regional wastewater utility authority, much like they did in DeSoto County, Mississippi? They built a regional authority and got a substantial amount of Corps of Engineer dollars. And over the last 20, 25 years, they've gotten somewhere around $225 million. And the entire northern portion of Mississippi now is grown by leaps and bounds because they set the table and had the infrastructure in place. We're kind of looking at trying to do the same thing. But Roger, I was just wondering, when Consolidated Utility District got up and running, you know, the utility district law in Tennessee, it's a pretty complicated law, and there was a court case, I believe it was a Chattanooga federal court case, that says you can't reduce a utility district's area if they've got a pending federal loan, and utility districts have leaned on that for years to protect their area. But if you were to form a regional system, or when you all consolidated, you didn't change any utility district charted area, you all just combined the operation into one, so there was no issue with utility district law, or did you have to make changes to that?
We did not have to make changes to that. We took all of those 4 service areas and combined into one. We were part of that lawsuit actually years ago with Murfreesboro on the boundary agreements there and everything.
So you guys did that.
It was us, yes. Yeah. So, but anyways, we're good friends now. So, no, with the regional authority that you're talking about creating. I would think that would have the rights over the other utility districts or the other. I think if you have an authority that oversees, it takes a lot of concessions and a lot. I was in my previous careers. This is the third and final stop I'm going to be at in my life. But I've been in other states that have and gone through regionalization, both in water and in wastewater, and it's really establishing that authority. Not really over the district, and it has, municipalities have had to concede certain things to make the district the best. How do you do that? That's always the very political side of the question. I know Des Moines Water was working on a huge regionalization water thing. So, there's a lot of, to tell you how it's going to go. I foresee a regional authority over a regional district is what I would see, and I know you said some of them are lagoons and things out there that they treat and go into a lagoon. So I know some of the things John was talking about are hard to try to do because it's really the lagoons and aeration is how they're treating it. So, but regionalization would probably be good for Rutherford County as well, but you never know how it's going to go and down the road for both water and sewer,
I believe the Water Authority of Dixon County is a regional authority. Mm-hmm. That's the one that I'm more familiar with than any others, and I think they did that, I believe, through a private act.
Correct.
Years ago. Rather than the general law authority, they did the private act route.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Appreciate it.
Let me add that on top of the obvious economies of scale that you would gain, another thing that you may look into is with the wider region, you have a wider watershed. So one of the problems that Murfreesboro has with a point discharge is we're saying, hey, to discharge right here, the regulations are super tight. And there's a spring just a mile from our discharge. They said if you would take the pipe and discharge a mile and a half downstream, there would be a different set of regulations. So, because that encompasses a different part of the watershed. And if you went another, say, 5 miles, then all of a sudden you're taking advantage of it. So the wider your watershed, the more likely you are to get a favorable regulation, which then in turn determines the type of technologies and equipment that you have, which could be very substantial. Yeah. I mean, it could be half the cost depending on what the regulations are. And so if you can capture a good spot in the watershed to say, hey, our permit's going to be based on this instead of this, then you can come up with a lot better situation economically.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Executive Huffman. Mr. Peach, you're recognized.
First of all, I would like to say that both of your organizations have been great partners in Rutherford County, and we've really appreciated CUD and Murfreesboro. And I don't want to confuse the drinking water with the wastewater too much, but you both have to deal with this. I was wondering if you've noticed in talking to your colleagues in East Tennessee that are on TVA, obviously those that pull from Percy Priest here have to deal with the Corps of Engineers. And do you recognize a significant cost difference operating a system off of Corps of Engineer water versus the TVA of those out in East Tennessee?
I'll handle that one. We just settled last year after 15 years working with the Corps for our new allotment. Yes, it was very, that was a one-time payment, but then we also have 3 other agreements with them that go back years that we have maintenance payments on. So, would the great answer be to be, so those are yearly annual fees that we pay, those 3. It took 15 years to try to get our allotment of what our plant can produce of 32 million. We received 28.5 from them. This is daily, of course. Currently just worked out an agreement with Murfreesboro, who has a little bit of an excess, so that way we would never be in violation of the Corps in a winter drought, is how they calculate that. It's very tough. We're already talking about, if the last one took 15 years, we probably need to start talking about the next one, because, before long, we're going to be at that 32 million and need more water. So, I've talked to a lot across the state. That deal can take right out of the Cumberland and can take out of the Tennessee, and, they don't have the costs that we have, and ultimately it comes down to just a couple of inches on the docks on Percy Priest. Is there 3 inches less water in the lake than there is? But that's the deal we all have to, Smyrna, ourselves, all pulling off of there, have to do with. So thank you for the question.
And the opportunity there is that sometimes these costs are a function of a regulation. When Roger mentioned a winter drought, oftentimes there's no drought in terms of anybody would notice anything. It's a drought by definition, rule, regulation, and then that costs money.
Mr. Clifton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My background, many years ago, I managed a municipal water and wastewater system in East Tennessee. Both were consolidated systems. And first, I want to compliment Executive Huffman and Mr. Terry on the comprehensive scope of this study. I think you're covering a lot of ground. But one thing I would like to ask the two of you, and also maybe incorporate in the study, is what are your labor costs, and is there a labor shortage, and primarily in licensed operators? When I was managing water and wastewater years ago, water plant operators were, there were more of them. Folks wanted to get into the industry. But now we're seeing fewer and fewer people getting into the water and wastewater industry and getting their licensure. So we talk about capital cost and operational cost, and inflation and materials availability and so on. But if you could, we deal, in my business, we deal with a lot of smaller rural utilities, and that labor shortage and the lack of those licensed operators is an issue. So if you could maybe speak to that, and maybe if the study could address some of this. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question. Yes, the baby boomers leaving is hurting the industry. I actually just got back last evening from the National Rural Water Association conference, and that was a lot of the conversation going on out there, and some of the presentations. And actually, we just literally did a video that they're going to be talking about CUD and it is about workforce initiatives, and how are we doing it, and how are others doing it, and it's a way to try to get it out to the smaller utilities. There's no glory, there's not a lot of glory in working at a water plant, or working at a sewer plant, but you got to have that service drive and something like that. And I've always used it throughout my career that if you're in the water and sewer industry, you're never going to get rich, but you're always going to have a satisfying job and know that you're doing something. Because in the water treatment side, it's the only it's the only utility that you ingest, you know. So, you know, think about it, and everybody just kind of, you know, turns the water on and expects it to be there. So there is a shortage. We've actually been able to, and TAUD, Tennessee Association of Utility Directors, they've got a great program going on, an apprenticeship program. I actually have 9 employees right now going through the apprenticeship program with TAUD, and they have, I think, throughout the state now, I think they have close to 35 people throughout the state at different utilities. So we're also working, they just started TAUD just started another in a local high school for the first one to try to get into the high schools. So we're trying our best. We do it. We go into the schools and go to all the job things, job fairs, go to the colleges. Because most of the time when, you know, if you look at a utility, it's not just an operator or things. You know, we have accountants, we've got water quality, we've got biology, we've got customer service, so billing, you know. So you need more than just an operator. But in the operator field, we have to continue to search for that because the retirees of the current system, and for some reason it's not a glory field that the younger workforce would like to get into. So that's my comments. I don't know if John has any.
We're also seeing a lack of, especially licensed operators. If you tried to hire a licensed operator, you'd probably be out of luck. But getting anybody in general is pretty tough. I feel like we are at the tip of the spear for technology, so this is going to trickle down eventually, but for Murfreesboro, automation is kind of a reality. Technology is here now, so we've actually seen our operator work staff number requirements go down. So yes, less available, but less of a need based on technology, based on automation. That technology and automation gets cheaper and cheaper every year. So I expect it to slowly trickle out to every municipality at some point. The other thing is, once again, the regulatory environment. So if you're required to staff that facility 24/7, that's going to be a pretty big expense. But if, like in some locations, you don't have to have anybody on the weekend, that's a big savings, especially if you say, hey, I can go from a 4-man crew to a 2-man crew, and you cut your expenses in half. That's a big deal for many smaller utilities. So the technology is coming, but in the meantime, you know, some regulatory relief could be a potential, or working that out operationally that satisfies the regulators while minimizing the staff.
Thank you, Mr. Clifton. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Goodson, Mr. Strickland, thank you for your very informative discussion. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next, Presley Powers, Fiscal Capacity User Guide Update. Tab 10.
Good morning, members. Today I'm providing an update to the Fiscal Capacity Users Guide, which is a guide maintained by TACIR staff to aid in the understanding of our fiscal capacity calculations. The update is, of course, open to review and comment, but does not require a vote. Following the adoption of a new K-12 funding formula, the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act, or TISA, staff have updated their 2004 information guide on fiscal capacity, which is now entitled A User's Guide to Fiscal Capacity in the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Funding Formula. Although the state's funding formula has changed, TACIR's model has not. TACIR continues to use the same model with the same variables as were adopted for use starting in 1992. Over the years, staff have identified potential changes or updates to the model, which are also covered in this user's guide. These potential changes were discussed during the annual presentation of the model to the Commission at its June 2023 meeting. The purpose of the user's guide is to provide a layman's explanation of concepts such as what fiscal capacity is, how it differs from fiscal effort, why fiscal capacity matters, what the TACIR fiscal capacity model is, how and why the components of the current county level fiscal capacity are measured, how the factors are used to estimate county area fiscal capacity, how and why the fiscal capacity index is computed, and how the fiscal capacity index is used in the TISA formula. This concludes my update, and I will now open the floor to any questions you may have.
Any questions? Comments? Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Oh, did I miss? Oh, Mayor, go ahead. I'm sorry, Presley.
No, excuse me. Just one short question. When we were doing our budgeting last year on county government level, there's a lot of reluctance from Department of Education and our local school boards to give us the TISA formula that was like the BEP formula. Do you have that available?
The TISA calculations?
Yes.
We were provided with the information that would apply to our model, so the base and weight amounts, but I can place you in contact with the department to get any further calculations.
I tried to contact the commissioner, the previous commissioner, and it seemed to be a secret. So it's kind of tough doing a good budgeting model for county government, any government, if you don't know what the formulas are that you're working with. So if you have another name that may answer my question, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Presley. Director Lippard, other business.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only other business is setting our next meeting date, and we have two proposed dates listed on the bottom of the agenda, either December 6, 7 or December 13, 14. We, of course, have our last meeting of the calendar year in December so that we can finalize any reports that have to go back to the General Assembly by January. We can either set that date now, or if the members prefer, we can poll the members following the meeting.
Any comments? Do you, I mean, you want to do that, or do you want to poll?
Do you want to poll publicly, or you want to poll after the meeting?
What we'll do is we'll reach out to the members, because there are some members who aren't here. It might be more beneficial to email all the members and confirm. But we will certainly indicate that December 6, 7 seems to be the indication of the members present.
All right, that sounds good. And Mayor Anderson, that was a suggestion, I guess, not a motion. Anything else, Director Lippard?
No, Madam Chair, that is all.
All right, unless there is an objection, we will stand adjourned. Hearing none, we are adjourned.